anyone that doesn't tell you that there's a revolution happening in Africa then doesn't like you. Because actually times and tides are changing on the continent. We're seeing young people taking over leadership and calling out the West for the bureaucratic relationships that they've been having with Africa. Young people are beginning to say enough is enough. If Africa is a rich continent, then it should reflect on the continent. It should reflect in the way the people live, in the quality of their life, in the standard of their life, in the jobs, in the development, in everything. Africa's youngest president, who is also a military leader, and the leader of the Burkina Faso junta, who seized power from the former president of Burkina Faso, did not hold back during the Africa-Russia summit. This is what he had to say.
It's not quite clear to me how come that Africa that has so many resources, water, solar energy, how come that currently it is the poorest continent in the world with the highest levels of famine? How come that we have to ask for help? We ask ourselves, but we don't get any answers. We have a chance to build new relationship. Hopefully, this relationship will be for the better to us in order to build a better future for our country.
Hello there, how are you doing? Welcome again to another episode of our conversations. My name is Ondiro Oganga. It's always an absolute pleasure coming on here and having a chat with you guys on Black people, Africa, our empowerment, and how we can rise up and take our rightful place at the global stage. During the Russia-Africa summit, there was a breakout star. Now, he's the military leader of Burkina Faso, and he is the youngest military leader and actually leader on the African continent at just 35 years old. And through a military coup, they were able to seize power in Burkina Faso. And Burkina Faso is a very interesting country. It has had its own challenges, but it's very interesting to see somehow they coming out on top of this and looking good at the international stage. Now, the leader was one of the speakers at the Russia-Africa summit, and he just took the world by surprise because of how we perceive Africans, one, and also how we perceive military leaders. We always tend to think of them as very brute people, as people who are very self-centered, who only know force and do not have the best interests of the country at heart. Now, that is up to debate, but from the conversations and how he expressed himself in Russia, it's almost okay for the people of Burkina Faso to have a little bit of hope that better days lie ahead of them. And this is one young man who, he's from a generation that just say it as it is. They're not affected by the trauma of colonialism, and so they're not afraid to speak truth to power. First of all, he says that African leaders are not puppets. African leaders are not puppets of the West. The West should not just cough and African leaders are running and scattering all over the place. Africa already fought for its independence, shed a lot of blood, sweat and tears to be able to be free, to be considered free countries, to be able to make their own decisions, to have a right on what happens in their own country to their people, by their people, for their people. And so while Western influence is not a bad thing, because sometimes it's also important to have conversations with people, know what they think, they're your partners, it doesn't mean that the West has power, sole power over African countries. African countries should be allowed to make their own decisions. They should be allowed to make their own mistakes and learn from their own mistakes. They should be allowed to have a say in their own development, in how they use their resources, in how they use their money, where their money goes to. Africans should be allowed to decide who becomes their leader. I'll tell you this for free. In Kenya, during the 2013 general election, the former president Uhuru Kenyatta and his then vice president William Ruto had cases at the International Criminal Court over the 2007 post-election violence. And the West made it very clear that they did not want these two people in office. In fact, they kept saying choices have consequences, choices have consequences. Anyway, did Kenyans listen? No, they put them in office. But this just goes to show that the West almost feels entitled to how Africans should make their decisions. And that's what the military leader of Burkina Faso is saying. That has to end.
Leaders of African states should not be puppets when imperialists treat them like that.
Parce qu'au prochain forum, nous ne devrons pas venir ici sans avoir assuré pour ceux qui ne connaissent pas la guerre l'autosuffisance alimentaire de nos peuples. Nous devons prendre l'expérience de ceux qui ont pu déjà atteindre cela en Afrique, tisser de bonnes relations ici et tisser de meilleures relations avec la Fédération de Russie pour pouvoir assouvir les besoins de nos populations. Je ne serai pas peut-être long, le temps est imparti et très court. Nous sommes obligés de nous arrêter à un moment donné. Mais je voudrais terminer en disant que nous devons donc rendre hommage à nos peuples. À nos peuples qui se battent. Gloire à nos peuples. Dignité à nos peuples. Victoire à nos peuples. La patrie ou la mort, nous vaincrons.
Glory to our
Merci,
people,
camarades.
respect to our people, and victory to our people. Thank you, comrades.
Another thing that he was very vocal to speak about was the place of the youth and how the youth are currently suffering on the continent, which is actually by design of the West, because slavery provided cheap labor. And that's the truth. It wasn't even cheap. It was free labor. You came to the continent, you kidnapped people. Some of them were sold to you for throwaway prices, and you used them to work for nearly free on those plantations, and you built your country off of the back sweat and blood, sweat and tears of Black people. And it's happening all over again. How so? You look at the continent, a continent that is very rich in natural resources, is one of the poorest places on the surface of the earth. And what does this mean? It means that the people of the continent cannot benefit. They're struggling, they're languishing in poverty. If you look at some of the business deals that these people have on the continent, La France Afrique, for example, a business deal between Francophone countries and France. It's a very one-sided business agreement that benefits the West. And this just means that resources cannot trickle down to the African economies, and governments cannot use this money to create jobs or to create sustainability to ensure that these countries are favorable for young people to stay. And so young people are desperate to leave the continent in droves. They're dying in the desert, trying to leave the continent, you know. And when they leave, where are they going to? Europe. Now, Europe will act as if they don't want these people, but in essence, they like the fact that Africans can go there and provide cheap labor, near free labor, working minimum wage in very harsh conditions, conditions that they themselves can never work, jobs that they themselves can never do, jobs that they know are not dignified jobs. They will do those jobs in order to keep these economies and these markets running at the expense of African, you know. So young people are leaving the continent, people who could have developed the continent, to go and do undignified jobs in Europe. And Europe is very happy about it because it's modern day slavery. It's near free labor when you're making very little minimum wage and it costs them nothing. And the president, or rather the military leader of Burkina Faso, is saying that has to change. We have to start doing deals that benefit the continent so that our people can live dignified lives on the continent.
On behalf of my generation, I would like to say that due to poverty, many had to cross oceans in quest for a better life. At times, they die.
Pour ce qui concerne le Burkina Faso,
at times they starve.
Aujourd'hui, nous sommes
It's hard for them to survive. As for Burkina Faso, it's been 8 years since we have been facing the most barbaric and violent form of colonialism, barbarism. We are imposed this modern form of slavery. We were taught one thing: a slave that cannot rebel does not deserve pity. And we decided to fight against terrorists that impede our development and our struggle. Our peoples decided to take up arms in order to fight terrorism. We're surprised that imperialists, they are called militarized units.
Another important thing to note from his speech was the fact that he mentioned that Africa is a very rich continent, as I've rightfully mentioned before in this video, yet it's still the poorest poorest places on earth. And he says, freedom does not mean anything if you don't have financial autonomy and economic autonomy, intellectual autonomy. Africa has to be allowed to benefit from its freedom and its resources. Because how is it? I've always wondered if some of these countries that have no resources at all, are some of the richest countries in the world. Because of the nature of the businesses that they do here on the continent, they will bring guns in the DRC to ensure that fighting continues, and those shipments and containers will leave with gold.
Camarades, j'ai quelques questions donc de ma génération. Mille et une questions qu'on se pose. Mais nous n'avons pas de réponse. Et surtout qu'ici, nous pouvons laver donc notre linge sale parce qu'on se sent en famille. On se sent en famille en ce sens que la Russie est une famille aussi pour l'Afrique. C'est une famille parce que nous avons la même histoire.
Russia is also a family to Africa because we share history.
Pour libérer le mondisme pendant la Seconde Guerre mondiale.
Russia has sacrificed a lot
nos grands-pères ont été déportés de force aussi pour aider l'Europe à se débarrasser du nazisme.
Europe
Nous partageons la même histoire en ce sens que nous sommes les peuples oubliés du monde.
Have shared history.
Qu'ils soient dans les livres d'histoire, dans les documentaires ou films, on tend donc à balayer le rôle prépondérant qu'a joué la Russie et de l'Afrique dans cette lutte contre le nazisme.
In many ways, the role of Russia and Africa in the fight against Nazism has been forgotten. But today we stand together, and today we're here to talk about the future of our countries and what will happen tomorrow in this new free world to which we aspire for, where there will be no meddling in our domestic affairs. We have shared prospects, and I hope that this summit will provide an opportunity to establish just.
There, I said it. It's not a secret. It's public knowledge that some of these Western countries benefit from creating instability on the African continent. And it's just high time, as the leader of Burkina Faso is saying, African leaders must wake up and smell the coffee and start making decisions that are best for Africans. Well, there you have it. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next time. Let me know what you think about this video. Let me know what you think about the sentiments shared by the military leader of Burkina Faso. I'll see you again next time.